Okay, the second major exercise we did down in UYO was to generate a fiscal performance graph which was dynamic based on the ministry that we chose from a drop-down. So this I'm going to do in two parts. First of all, I'm going to generate the data table which will feed the graph, and then I'm going to produce the graph. So the first thing we want to do is we want to identify what we're going to show in our graph based on our data set here. So I'm just going to come down to row 12, and what I want to do is I want to identify budget and actual expenditure, and I want to do this separately for recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. So it's basically the data we have here, but in a slightly different format. And obviously what we're going to be putting in here is just a single ministry. What I then want to identify is the performance, and this is going to be a percentage of actual over budget. And then similarly to what we did with the ministerial deliverables, I want to identify what the performance is in terms of a red, amber or green rating. And again, I'm going to use the same ranges, so performance 70% and above, performance 50 to 70%, and performance less than 50%. If we were in a situation where some of our ministries didn't have their actuals, we would also put in here a fourth classification, which is data missing. Similar to not accessible in our ministerial deliverables, we could have a fourth classification here, data not available or not accessible, because we don't have the actuals. But in this example here, we do have the actuals for all of our ministries. So what we want to do is we want to automatically populate this depending on which ministry we choose from a drop-down box. So let's create our drop-down box. What we want to do is in this cell here, in cell A11, we want to be able to choose between our three ministries. And in this example, we have three, but you can have as many as you like. Obviously, for the purposes of the presidential retreats, we show the data for 29 ministries. But in this example, we just have three. So to create a drop-down box that has these three options, we come into our menu and we go to Data. And then we come to our little option here, Data Validation. And if we click this, we get this box up here. And what we want to do in the settings menu, we go to Allow and we select List. And then what we have to do is we have to define our list. All we're going to do is click on this and we're going to select a range of cells which will become our list. So click on that button and our range of cells is just our three ministries. So we select our three ministries and then press Enter on the keyboard and then click OK. Now we can see here this little drop-down box icon has appeared, and here we have our list of ministries. And I'm just going to color this cell, so I'm going to come to our home menu here, and I'm going to color it blue just to tell us that this is a cell where we need to enter our selection of our ministry. Okay, now we're going to write the formulas so that whichever ministry we pick, it is going to pick up the data for that ministry. And for this, we're going to use the V or vertical lookup formula. So let's start to write the formula. So the VLOOKUP formula is VLOOKUP, open bracket. And what effectively this does is it is based on a defined data range. So the data range is going to be our table of fiscal data here. And what it does, a VLOOKUP, is it goes down the first column of the table and it finds the value that you are putting in, which is this is going to be the ministry. So it will go down this first column of the table, it will find the ministry, and then it will go across the number of columns that you tell it to go across to pick up the data you want. So in our VLOOKUP formula, first of all, it's saying, right, what do you want to look up? What value are you looking for? So we are going to be looking for the ministry that is in this cell here. Table array. So this is what table are we looking for this value in? So the table is going to be our ministries and our data. Now the first column of this table is what it's going to be looking up in, which we can see it's going to find this. And then it has a total of 5 columns. The first column being where it looks, and then we want to return one of the other columns. So this is the lookup table. This is what it's looking for. The next thing is how many columns is it going to go across? Once it's gone down the first column and found Ministry of Budget and National Planning, it is going to go across a number of columns to find the value you want. So what we want here is we want recurrent expenditure budget, which is this figure here in cell B3. And it's the second column. So we put in a 2. So what it's going to do in this formula is it's going to go down the first column, it's found Ministry of Planning and Budget, and then it returns the value in column 2 of the table. The last thing we do here is we write false. So that's the last part of our formula. False just tells us that if it doesn't find exactly this criteria here, then it's going to return an error or a 0. Now we need to lock up the anchor some of the column and row references. So we always, because we're going to copy this formula across and down, so we always want to be looking at this value here. So we're going to anchor A and anchor 11. The table has to remain static as well. So when we copy this formula across and down, this table has to remain exactly the same. So we have to anchor all of the column and row references for the table. The 2 is what's going to change in each of these, but we're going to do that manually. Okay, so what we can see here is this is picked up, and we're just going to change this to be a number in the same format as here. So we're just going to come and click on our little comma here in our home menu, and we don't need to see these cobos, so let's get rid of our decimals by clicking here. Now before we copy this across, let's just see what happens when we change this to Ministry of Health. It is picking up this figure. When we change this to Ministry of Power, it's picking up this figure. So now what we want to do is replicate this formula for capital expenditure budget here, actual recurrent expenditure, which is this column here, and actual capital expenditure, which is this column here. So let's copy this formula. We'll copy it into all of the 4 cells, and then all we're going to go and do is change the column reference. So if you see in the formula, we now want to be finding capital expenditure budget, which is in, you see here, this is the 3rd column in the table. So we're going to change this to the 3. And that is now picking up this figure here. For recurrent expenditure actual, again, we want to be going to column D, which is the 4th column in this table that's highlighted red here. So we go and we put in 4. And for this here, finally, our capital expenditure actual, that is in column 5 of the table, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we change this to a 5. So now again, if we come and select our ministry, we can see it's picking up all of the correct data. Now we want to do our performance score. So this is fairly straightforward. We're just going to write the formula. So the performance is the actual divided by the budget. So the formula is B13, which is our actual, divided by B12, which is our budget. This is automatically going to generate the figure as a decimal or a numerical figure. Let's just change it to a percentage by clicking there, and let's just increase the decimal place so we can see actually that this is above 100%. And then we're just going to copy this across. So again, now what you'll see is if I change the ministry, our performance calculation is changing based on the data in our table. Now, what I want to do is automatically assign the percentage performance in the relevant row. So if the percentage performance is above 70, I want to see it here. If it's between 50 and 70, here, and if it's less than 50, I want to see it here. So again, we're going to use if formulas. So we're going to say equals if B14 is greater than or equal to 0.7, which is 70%, then I want to return this percentage score. If not, and this is where we use a bit of a trick in Excel, and this you'll see when we come to the graphs. Normally we'd say a blank cell or a 0, but graphs do funny things with blank cells. So rather than putting in a blank cell using the double quotation, we're actually going to do something else. We're going to say hash n-a and close bracket. Okay, and you'll see what happens here in a minute if I change the formula, but let's again change this to a percentage with 1 decimal place or 2 decimal places. So if I change this and this score goes below 70%, you'll see this should change to a hash NA. So let's just choose Ministry of Power. You'll see it changes to hash NA, which is what we want. Okay, so that's that formula. For performance which is greater than or equal to 50% but less than 70%, if you remember, this requires a double if statement or an embedded if statement, equals if this score here, our performance score, is less than 0.7, so it's less than 70%. If it is greater than or equal to 50%, then we want to see this figure here. If not, we want our hash NA. And again, this is now back to the first condition. If this is not less than 70%, we also want to see hash NA. Close bracket. So we have our embedded if statement. If the performance is less than 70%, if it is greater than or equal to 50%, then we return that. If not, we return hash NA. And if the first condition is not met, it's not less than 70, then we also return hash NA. And then the final one is just a single if statement, equals if the performance is less than 50%, then we have our performance figure. If not, we have hash NA. Okay, and we're going to copy these across. And let's just check the scoring. So if we change our ministry to health, and okay, let's just make sure everything is a percentage. So if we're health, we can see this is the less than 50%, and this one is greater than 70%. Finance, they're both above, and power. Okay, so we don't actually have any that are in this range here. Let me just go in and change some of our base data so that we have at least something to show that this is working. So what I'm going to do for finance, budget and national planning, just to show that what's going to happen, just to show that we get a figure in here, let me come and change the capital expenditure actual to make it within the range 50 to 70%. So I'm going to change this to, rather than 103, I'm going to change it to 80. Okay, so now we have our example that is in this range here of 50 to 70. So this is our table, this is our data table. It is now ready for us to produce our graph. Okay, so this is the second part of this practical. The first part, we created our data set for our graph, which is dynamic depending on the ministry we choose. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a graph based on this data. So let me return it to Finance, Budget and National Planning. So first of all, let's select our data set for our graph, and that's just selecting all of this, and we're going to the Insert menu, and we're just going to select any chart for now. In fact, actually, let's just select a clustered column for now. Now, the first thing we want to do, and it's not necessarily easy to see this straight away, but this is being presented slightly wrong insofar as this is picking up our columns and the data is in the rows. We want it the other way around. So we come into our graph menu here, chart design, and we just click switch row column. And that is now in the correct format. So it's now looking at here the columns and the rows are our items down here. Okay, and what we want to do now is we want to turn this into a combo graph. So what we want is we want our budget and our actual to be the bars, but our performance we want to be dots or bubbles, as I call them. So we're going to go in and change the graph to a combo graph. So let's come back up to our chart design menu, chart type. And if we look down here, we go to the bottom and we go to combo. And what we want, as I said, our budget and actual we want as clustered columns, but all of our performance we want as we want to see them as dots. So we're going to choose scatter, and it's automatically assigned this to the secondary x-axis. If it doesn't, you need to click on this to say plot this in the secondary x-axis. And we're going to do the same for all of our other performance figures. Scatter and scatter. Okay, so click on OK, and you can now see the chart is looking slightly different. It has bubbles or dots for our performance, and it has bars for our budget and actual data. Now, because these performance figures are being shown as a scatter, they have both an X and a Y value. We don't actually need to see the X value, so I'm actually going to just delete this. And now what that does is that moves our performance bubble into the middle of the graph. The other thing we need to do, we don't actually need to see this performance figure here. You see where we see grey performance, which is this column, this row here in the table. We don't need to see this because what we want to see is the performance in the category here above 70% or between 50 and 70 or below 70. So we don't want to see this. So we're just going to unselect this in our chart data. So we come up to our select data, and we can see here in this box on the right, on the left hand side, we just uncheck performance, which means performance will not be shown in the graph because we don't need it, because it will be captured in one of these three data sets here. So let's click OK. So now we have just performance above, performance 70% and above, performance 50 to 70%, performance less than 50%. Now what we're going to do is we want to change these bubbles so they look slightly different, but also we want to change some of the appearance of the chart as well. So changing these bubbles to be differently presented, different colors, I'm going to do in the second part of this video. The first part, first of all, let's change this to show in billions of naira. We don't want all of these zeros. So I'm just going to double click on this here. So I double clicked over the axis title, and in my menu here where you see the three bars, we're going to come to display units, and let's display in billions. And we're going to uncheck this. We don't need to see the units because we're actually going to put that in the axis title. Okay, so that has done the axis title, the primary y-axis. Now let's also do the secondary vertical axis. We don't need to see the 0, 0 here, so we just want to get rid of the decimal places. So again, double click on the axis, and again we want to be in this area here where we have the bars, and let's come down to number, and you can see it's percentage, but let's change the decimal places to 0. Okay, that looks nice now. What I'm going to do is, whilst we're doing these, I'm going to put in the axis titles. So to put in axis titles, we come up to our chart design menu and add chart element and axis title. So we want a primary vertical, and same thing again, we want a secondary vertical. So now let's type, so let's come to the primary vertical. So this is expenditure in brackets billion naira, enter, and this is expenditure performance in brackets percentage. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is the chart title. In fact, I'm going to save the chart title for the next video. In the final video, we're going to do a dynamic chart title, and we're going to assign red, amber, green ratings to our performance bubbles, make them a little bit bigger, and also include the actual performance figure in them. So that we'll do in the final video. Okay, so we have our base chart. In this final session, what we want to do is have a dynamic chart title, and we want to change these performance bubbles into red, amber, and green. So the first thing, let's come away from our graph, and what we're going to do in cell A10 is to actually write our chart title, and then what we'll do is we'll link the chart title to cell A10. So what we want to do is we want to have a chart title that gives us the ministry name and also the year. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put in a year in cell A9, and we're going to say 2022. And so in cell A10, I want to have a chart title that says the year, the ministry, and what we're looking at. And this, we're going to use the AND symbol to join up a string of dynamic and static text. So we're in cell A10, and what we're going to do, our chart title, we want to start with our ministry name. So our ministry name is here in our drop down, so we're going to link this to cell A11. And then we want to put in some static text. So to come to our second part of the text, we put in the and quotation mark, which allows us now to write static text. So Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning is what we'll get from cell A11, and space, dash, space, expenditure performance, and a space, so that's our static text, close quotation, and cell A9. So what this will read, once we click OK, it will give us the ministry, space, dash, space, expenditure performance, space, 2022. If we change our ministry, this changes. If we change our year, this changes. So let's go back to finance and 2022. And now what we do is our chart title, click on our chart title, come up to our menu, our formula bar, and say equals, and we just click on this cell here. So this is now our chart title. So again, I'm just going to make this bold and make the font a little bit smaller. So now if we change our ministry, our data changes and our chart title changes. Let's come back to finance. So that is our static chart title. Last thing we want to do is we want to change the appearance of these performance bubbles. So if our performance is 70% and above, we want a green bubble. If it is between 50 and 70, we want an amber bubble. And if it's less than 50, we want a red bubble. So we have to do these one at a time. So let's just click on this here. So this will pick up performance above 70%. And in fact, let's just click away, and you have to do this quite carefully. I'm just going to double click on this straight away, and it's going to bring up the data series. Now come across to this paint pot here and click on marker and our marker options, and we want to first of all make it a bit bigger, so we click on built in and we click on our size, and let's just make it 18. And then we want to change the fill, so this one here is above 70%, so we're going to make it green. And also our border, let's make our border green as well. So we can see here we're in marker options, we've made it 18 and we've changed it to green. Okay. Let's do the same for this one here. So this blue one is our performance between 50 and 70. So we want to make this amber. So what we're going to do again, we come to our paint pot, come to marker, marker options, and again we're going to do built in and make it 18. And we want to change our fill color to amber. And we want to change our border also to amber. Okay, so let's close that down. Now we need to generate a performance figure that's less than 50% in order to change this. So let's come and select a different ministry. Let's go for health. Okay, now, so we can see this one here. This is performance which is less than 50%. So let's click on this, double click on this. Again, come to paint pot, marker options, built in, change this to 18, change the fill color to red, and change the border color to red. Okay, close this down. So now we have our bubbles. So depending what the performance is, we can see that if it's above 70%, it's green. If it's less than 50%, it's red. And let's just go to a different ministry. Power. Again, power has one red, one green. Finance has one green, one amber. The last thing we want to do is to put in the actual percentage in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the green one to start off with, come up to our chart design menu and add chart element. And we're going to do data label center. Okay. And again, we're going to do the same here. Let's click on this one, add chart element, data label center. Now we want these data labels to be slightly, we don't want to see the decimals. So we're actually going to change that in here. We're going to come to our data here and let's actually remove the decimals. So we just do this. Okay. Now these data labels, again, if you click on here, this is now the data label. Let's make this a little bit smaller. So we come up to our home menu, let's make the font a little bit smaller. Let's make it white and let's make it bold. And again, we do the same here. So if we click so that we're highlighting the data label, we're going to make it smaller, we're going to make it white, and we're going to make it bold. And let's do the same. So let's come back to our graph. Let's change to health, and we want to do the same for our red. So let's come to the red one, chart design, add chart element, data labels, center. Now click on the data label and make it one size smaller, make it white and make it bold. Okay, so that's basically done. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so that we can try and get it onto 2 rows. And it's not going to let me. Okay, it's now on 2 rows. Make it a little bit smaller. So we want the maximum amount of our graph to actually be the graph itself. So that's now our graph. And again, if we change Ministry of Health to Ministry of Power to Ministry of Finance, our data is changing, our title is changing, our performance bubbles are changing. So that's that. The last thing we did was we actually moved this to a new worksheet. If we want to move the graph, then let's go to select the graph, chart design, move chart. And let's click on here, a new sheet. Sorry, no, we're going to put in an object in, and let's do, okay, sorry. First of all, let's create a new sheet. So let's come down here, sheet 1. Let's just call this sheet graph. And let's move this to this worksheet here. So we click on the graph, we go to chart design, move chart, object in, graph. Okay, so now it's an object here. If we want to link our drop down, so we want to put the drop down here, we can create our drop down. So we go to data, data validation, allow, list, and again, same as we did before, we choose our list, which is in our outputs worksheet, sorry, is in our fiscal performance worksheet, and we select our list. Okay, change this to blue, make the column a little bit wider. So now at the moment these are not linked, this is just a list. What we want to do is we want to link this cell here, this list, to whatever we put in here. So let's come in here, and rather than this being selected from the drop down, we're just going to say equals, come to our graph tab, and we want to make it equal to whatever is in here. Now you may not be able to select this cell. You see it's an arrow here, it's turned into an arrow rather than the plus. Just select any cell and come in here and change this to 1. So it's now selecting A1. So what we see here now is if we change the graph here, it is our data is picking up which ministry we choose from this drop down here. Okay, so that's that.